Okay, today we're going to cover a little bit less stuff, but we're going to be talking about how we kind of work backwards to find angles. This is still based on using our charts, the 30, 45, 60 chart and the quadrantal angle chart, but working backwards. Given the value, let's find the angle. Instead of being given the angle, let's find the value. So we're not going to be using QSFR. Today we're going to be using something I call RQA. But before we get into that, I'm on page 11 of the notes. At the top of the page, we have three new functions. They're what we call our reciprocal functions: cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So what that means is if we know, for example, the sine is a half, then the cosecant is the reciprocal of that, which is 2 over 1. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So what that means is if we know the value of cosine is rad 3 over 2, then we know the value of secant is 2 over rad 3, which if we want, we could rationalize that and make it 2 rad 3 over 3. Cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. So if we know the tangent is negative 3/4, then we know the cotan is negative 4 over 3. And vice versa. Maybe we'll know the cotan is negative 4 over 3. That means we know the tan is negative 3 over 4. So how are we going to do these questions? Well, if we look at the first example, if we know the sine of theta is a half, and we want to find the value or values that theta could be, because if we're going from 0 to 360, there are going to be two values. I do something I call RQA, where R stands for find the reference angle from the chart, working backwards, saying, okay, I know the sine of some angle is a half, so I look in my chart on my sine line and see where it's a half, and I see that's at 30 degrees. Then Q in RQA stands for quadrant. This is where I use ASTC, and I look at my example, and I have sine theta, and it's a positive. So I say, okay, what quadrants is sine positive in? Sine is positive in quadrants 1 and 2. So that means I'm going to have two answers, an angle in quadrant 1 and an angle in quadrant 2. And that's what the A stands for, is finding the angles in the correct quadrant. So that means I take that reference angle and I put it in the correct quadrant. Now if it's quadrant 1, the work's already done. Your reference angle is the angle in quadrant 1. In quadrant 2, we do 180 minus that reference angle, and we get 150. So our answer for number 1, or our answers, are 30 degrees and 150 degrees. For number 2, cosine theta is rad 2 over 2. Okay, so I write out RQA. First thing, I need to find the reference angle. So I use my chart, and on my chart, I look and I see where is the cosine equal to radical 2 over 2. On the chart, that's at 45 degrees. Okay, so there's my reference angle. Now I see that that value, rad 2 over 2, is positive. Well, Q is what quadrant? What quadrants is cosine positive in? If we go to our ASTC chart, cosine is positive in quadrants 1 and 4. So now that means to find my angle or my answer, I have to put that reference angle in quadrants 1 and 4. In quadrant 1, the reference angle is just the angle, so that's the 45 degrees. And in quadrant 4, we do 360 minus the 45, and we get 315 degrees. So those are our answers for number 2. Sorry, itchy nose. All right, number 3. Tan theta is negative rad 3. Okay, well, we ignore the negative for now and say, okay, let's think about rad 3. Let's go to our chart. What angle does tangent equal rad 3 on our chart? Oh, that's 60 degrees, so that's our reference angle. Now we deal with the negative and say, in what quadrants is tangent negative? Going back to ASTC. Well, in quadrants 2 and 4, tangent is negative. So that means I have to take that 60 degree reference angle and put it in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 4. In quadrant 2, we do 180 minus that reference angle, and in quadrant 4, we do 360 minus that reference angle. So there we have our answers of 120 and 300. Okay, example 4. Similar, the negative we ignore for now, and we say, okay, from our chart, where does rad 3 over 2 show up for sine? We look and we say, okay, that's at 60 degrees. And now we see it's negative, and we say, okay, from ASTC, when is sine negative? Sine is negative in quadrants 3 and 4. So now we have to put that 60-degree reference angle into quadrants 3 and 4. Here's how we do quadrant 3, a little different. We're going to do 180 plus 60. It's the only time we're adding on is when we're in quadrant 3, we do 180 plus the reference angle. That gives us 240. And then quadrant 4, 360 minus 60. Okay. Now let's see, number 5, again, when is tan equal to rad 3 over 3? That's our reference angle of 30 degrees. When is tan positive? In quadrants 1 and 3. Quadrant 1, we just keep the 30. Quadrant 3, we add 30 to 180 and we get 210. And so there are our answers, 30 and 210. Now questions 6, 7, and 8 are special. There are quadrantal angles. Anytime we have sine, cosine equal to 1, -1, or 0, or tangent equal to 0, this is when we know our answers are going to be the 0, 90, 180, 270, 360, the quadrantal angles on the unit circle. So if cosine theta is -1, we either think about our unit circle and think, okay, cosine is the x-coordinate, where is x negative, that's at 180 degrees, or you look at the other chart on page 4. Remember, we said on page 4 we have those two charts, the special 30, 45, 60 chart or the quadrantal angle chart. But anytime we have cosine or sine equal to 1, 0, or -1, it's going to be one of the quadrantal angles. Now if we go to number 7, sine is 0, another quadrantal angle. When is sine 0? Unit circle, sine is y. When is the y-coordinate 0 on our quadrantal angles? Well, if we look at the chart on page 4, we see sine is 0 at 0, 180, and 360. And then tangent kind of goes with sine. Whenever sine is 0, tangent 0. So again, from the chart on page 4, that's 0, 180, and 360. Now the last two are using our reciprocal functions. So as soon as I see secant, I think, all right, I don't have a chart with secant on it, but I have a chart with cosine. So if the secant is -2, the cosine is going to be negative, the reciprocal of 2 is 1/2. So we're really talking about the cosine being equal to -1/2. So again, RQA. What angle has a cosine of 1/2? I'm not worrying about the negative yet, just the 1/2, and that's 60 degrees. Then we say, okay, well, what quadrant is cosine negative in? Here's where the negative comes in. That's in quadrants 2 and 3. So we put our 60 degrees in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 3. Quadrant 2, you do 180 minus 60. Quadrant 3, you do 180 plus 60, and there are our two answers. And then finally, the last one, cosecant is 2 rad 3 over 3. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So we flip it, and that's 3 over 2 rad 3. But we don't have anything that looks like that, so let's rationalize. When we rationalize, we get 3 rad 3 over 2 times 3. The 3's cancel, so that gives us rad 3 over 2. So we go to our first chart on page 4. What angle has a sine of rad 3 over 2? That's 60 degrees. That's our reference angle. When is sine positive? In quadrants 1 and 2. So we put our reference angle into quadrants 1 and 2, and there we go. 60 degrees, and then 180 minus 60 is 120. Okay, I'll be posting a problematic worksheet to deal with this, and we can talk about this stuff on Monday. Bye.